We're counting down the 10 most extinct steam locomotives ever built. A ranking where revolutionary engineering, bold gambles, and tragic endings take center stage. From streamlined speedsters that promise to save steam to wartime giants built under desperate conditions, these machines are gone forever. Some ran for decades before vanishing without a trace, while others barely survived their first year before being cut apart for scrap. Expect locomotives that broke speed records only to be destroyed in the chaos of war. Prototypes that aimed to redefine rail travel but ended up melted down, and entire classes wiped out by the march of dieselization. Not a single survivor remains of any machine on this list. Which locomotive's extinction was the most tragic? Let's start at number 10 with a class that disappeared into the Soviet Union's secret weapons program.
Number 10 on the list vanished behind the Iron Curtain before most people knew it existed. The Soviet AA-20 turbine locomotive looked more like a factory on wheels than a steam engine, its massive frame stretching over 140 feet and housing experimental turbine technology borrowed from power plants. Built in 1936 by the Kolumna Works, this coal-burning monster was Stalin's answer to Western streamliners, designed to haul heavy freight across the endless Siberian steppe at speeds conventional engines could not touch. The AA-20 used a condensing turbine system that recycled exhaust steam through radiator banks, promising fuel efficiency that could stretch coal supplies on routes where resupply was days away. On paper, the turbine could generate 3,000 horsepower continuously, more than double what piston engines managed. Test records from Soviet railway archives show the AA-20 pulling 2,800-ton trains at sustained speeds above 55 miles per hour, performance that impressed even skeptical engineers who had watched other turbine experiments fail. But the reality of Soviet railroading in the 1930s was far from ideal conditions. Track quality was poor, maintenance facilities scarce, and coal often contaminated with slate and debris. The turbine blades designed for clean steam fouled rapidly. Condensers clogged with mineral deposits. Crews reported constant overheating and steam leaks that filled the engine compartment with scalding vapor. By 1937, with Stalin's purges sweeping through the railway ministry, the AA-20 program was abruptly canceled. Documents suggest the locomotive was diverted to military research, possibly disassembled for its turbine components. No photographs from after 1938 exist. The AA-20 didn't just go extinct, it was erased, a victim of both technical complexity and political terror.
The Great Western Railway's turbomotive didn't just push boundaries, it shattered them, then paid the ultimate price. Built in 1935 by Metropolitan Vickers in collaboration with the GWR, this locomotive abandoned pistons entirely, using a direct-drive steam turbine spinning at 6,000 RPM. The result was a machine that could accelerate smoothly to 90 miles per hour, riding on rails with a silence that made passengers think they were on an electric train, not a steam-powered express. The turbomotive's turbine consumed steam at a prodigious rate, but delivered it as smooth, continuous power. Unlike reciprocating engines that hammered the rails with each piston stroke, the turbine transmitted force as a steady push, reducing track wear and improving ride quality. Dynamometer car readings from 1936 show the turbomotive matching the performance of the GWR's best King-class engines while burning only marginally more coal at sustained high speeds. Crews who ran it described the experience as eerie. No rhythmic exhaust beat, no visible rods thrashing, just a faint hum and the rush of wind. For 17 years, the turbomotive ran express services between London and Bristol. racking up over 400,000 miles. Engineers refined the turbine, reducing maintenance intervals and improving efficiency. But in 1952, disaster struck. A faulty axle box overheated during a run near Ealing, igniting lubricating oil that spread to the turbine casing. Within minutes, the locomotive was engulfed in flames. Crews escaped unharmed, but the turbomotive was destroyed beyond repair. Rather than rebuild what was by then an obsolete experiment, British Railways sent it to the scrapyard. Not a single turbine blade, not a fragment of casing was preserved. The turbomotive proved that turbine propulsion could work, but when it burned, it took the entire concept with it, leaving only photographs and fading memories of the engine that whispered down the tracks.
The London, Midland, and Scottish Railways Fury didn't just fail, it killed. Built in 1929 by the North British Locomotive Company, Fury was an attempt to push boiler pressure into uncharted territory. While conventional locomotives operated at 200 to 250 psi, Fury's high-pressure Schmidt system ran at 900 psi, pressures normally reserved for industrial boilers, not moving vehicles. The promise was immense power from a compact design, using superheated steam at temperatures exceeding 750 degrees Fahrenheit. The engineering was radical. A small, high-pressure boiler fed steam to a set of cylinders, then exhausted into a larger, low-pressure boiler that powered additional cylinders. In theory, this cascading system would extract maximum energy from every pound of coal. On the test track in 1930, Fury generated impressive power, hauling heavy loads with ease. Observers noted the locomotive's compact profile and the astonishing force it could deliver from its relatively small frame. But on February 10, 1930, during a test run near Carstairs, a high-pressure boiler tube ruptured. Superheated steam at 900 psi exploded through the cab, killing fireman Tom Kerr instantly and severely injuring the engineer. The inquest revealed that the Schmidt system's narrow tubes could not tolerate even minor scale buildup, and the slightest imperfection triggered catastrophic failure. The LMS immediately halted all high-pressure experiments. Fury was rebuilt with conventional equipment and renamed British Legion, erasing almost every trace of its experimental origins. The original high-pressure components were scrapped, and all documentation classified to avoid further scandal. By 1935, British Legion itself was withdrawn and cut up, taking the last physical evidence of Fury's deadly gamble with it. Fury stands as a grim reminder that pushing steam pressure to the edge did not just risk mechanical failure, it risked human lives. And when it crossed that line, extinction was swift and absolute. The Pennsylvania Railroad T1 duplex didn't just disappear. It was erased from history in one of the most controversial scrapping decisions ever made. Built between 1942 and 1946, the T1 was a streamlined masterpiece, its sleek, shark-nosed body housing a radical duplex drive system that split the power between two sets of cylinders. This design promised to eliminate the hammer blow effect that shook conventional locomotives apart at high speeds, while delivering 6,550 horsepower, enough to haul 16-car passenger trains at sustained speeds above 100 miles per hour. Performance records from the Pennsylvania Railroad tell a story of astonishing capability. In 1946, a T1 was clocked at 140 miles per hour on a test run between Crestline and Fort Wayne, though the railroad never officially acknowledged the speed. Crews who ran them reported acceleration that left other steam engines gasping, with the T1 hitting 60 miles per hour from a standing start in under 2 minutes while hauling a full passenger consist. The duplex drive, with its 4 cylinders arranged in 2 separate engine units, distributed weight more evenly and reduced the brutal pounding that wore out track and machinery. But the T1's brilliance came with a curse. The divided drive made wheel slip unpredictable and violent. At high power settings, especially on damp rails, one set of drivers could break loose while the other gripped, creating a lurching, uncontrollable surge. Engineers learned to feather the throttle constantly, a technique that required skill and attention. Maintenance crews struggled with the complex valve gear, which demanded precise adjustment and constant monitoring. Bearing failures were common, and the streamlined casing made access difficult, turning routine inspections into hours-long ordeals. By 1949, the Pennsylvania Railroad had made its decision. Diesels were reliable, easy to maintain, and available in quantity. Despite the T1's speed and power, despite its potential, the entire class of 52 locomotives was condemned. Between 1949 and 1952, every single T1 was sent to the scrapyard. Not one was preserved. Pleas from enthusiasts and historical societies were ignored. The railroad wanted no reminders of steam's final, flawed attempt to compete. The last T1, number 5530, was cut apart in May 1956, and with it died the duplex drive, the streamlined dream, and the fastest steam locomotives America ever built. The German Class 05 held the world speed record for steam, then watched its entire class vanish in the fire and chaos of World War II. Built in 1935 by Borsig and AEG, the Class 05 was Nazi Germany's answer to Britain's Mallard and America's Streamliners, a trio of locomotives designed to prove German engineering supremacy. On May 11, 1936, locomotive 05002 hit 200.4 kilometers per hour, approximately 125.5 miles per hour, on the Berlin to Hamburg line, setting a speed record for conventional steam locomotives that still stands in Germany. The Class 05's design was aggressive. Streamlined fairings covered every pipe and fitting, creating a smooth shell that sliced through air resistance. A high-pressure boiler fed 3 cylinders with superheated steam, while roller bearings on every axle reduced friction to a minimum. Driving wheels measuring over 7 feet in diameter were optimized for speed, and the entire locomotive weighed in at just 127 tons, light for its power output. Test data from Deutsche Reichsbahn archives showed the Class 05 maintaining 160 kilometers per hour for extended periods while burning less coal per kilometer than heavier express engines. But speed records meant nothing in wartime. As World War II intensified, the Class 05 locomotives were pressed into ordinary express service, their streamlined fairings removed to ease maintenance. Bombing raids targeted German rail infrastructure relentlessly, and by 1945, the railway system was in ruins. Locomotive 05001 was destroyed in an Allied air raid in Berlin in April 1945. Locomotive 05002, the record holder, survived the war only to be seized by Soviet forces and taken east as war reparations. It vanished into the Soviet rail system, reportedly scrapped in the early 1950s. Locomotive 05003 was damaged beyond repair in 1944 and scrapped on site. Not a single Class 05 survived. The fastest steam locomotives Germany ever built, machines that represented the pinnacle of 1930s engineering, were obliterated by the war they were built to glorify. The Class 05 proved that speed alone could not save you when the world was burning, and when the smoke cleared, extinction was absolute. The South African Railways Class 26 Red Devil was an experiment that pushed condensing technology to its breaking point, then collapsed under its own ambition.
Built in 1953 by Henschel in Germany, the Red Devil, officially known as Locomotive number 3450, was designed to tackle the Karoo Desert, where water was scarcer than coal and conventional locomotives struggled to travel 100 kilometers between stops. The solution was a condensing system so advanced it bordered on science fiction. The Red Devil's tender was not a simple coal and water car. It was a mobile power plant, housing a gas turbine that drove cooling fans, pumping air through massive radiator banks that condensed exhaust steam back into water. The system could recover up to 95% of the water used, stretching the locomotive's range to over 1,400 kilometers without replenishment. A conventional locomotive on the same route required water stops every 150 kilometers. The gas turbine itself was a marvel, burning diesel fuel to power auxiliary systems and provide additional traction through a small electric motor. Test runs in 1954 showed the Red Devil performing exactly as designed, hauling heavy freight trains across the Karoo without stopping for water. Crews marveled at the locomotive's range and the quiet hum of the turbine, a stark contrast to the roaring exhaust of conventional engines. But every mile revealed new problems. The radiator banks fouled with dust and insects, reducing cooling efficiency and forcing frequent cleanings. The gas turbine, temperamental in the best conditions, broke down repeatedly in the desert heat. Fuel consumption for the auxiliary systems was staggering, often exceeding the cost savings from water recovery. Maintenance logs from the late 1950s read like a chronicle of despair. Turbine overhauls every few weeks, radiator tube replacements, fan motor failures, and bearing seizures that left the Red Devil stranded miles from help. By 1960, South African railways had seen enough. The Red Devil was withdrawn from service and, in a final indignity, stripped of its experimental equipment. The locomotive itself was scrapped in 1968 and the turbine system dismantled for parts. The Red Devil proved that you could build a locomotive that didn't need water, but you could not make it simple. And in the end, complexity killed it just as surely as thirst.
The Baldwin Centipede didn't just fail commercially, it took an entire company's reputation down with it. Built between 1945 and 1948, these diesel-electric behemoths were Baldwin's desperate attempt to compete with EMD and Alco in the post-war locomotive market. But hidden among the diesel centipedes was a forgotten prototype, the steam turbine electric version, officially designated as the RT624 series. Only two were ever built, and both are extinct, their story buried beneath decades of corporate embarrassment. The steam centipede stretched 92 feet long, its body shaped like a massive rectangular box sitting on two six-axle trucks. Inside, a coal-fired boiler generated steam that spun a turbine, which drove a main generator which powered 12 traction motors, 2 on each axle. Baldwin promised 6,000 horsepower, fuel flexibility, and the ability to use America's abundant coal reserves instead of imported diesel fuel. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, desperate for power on its mountain grades, ordered 2 units for testing in 1947. Test runs over the Allegheny grades showed the steam centipede could pull, generating massive tractive effort that hauled coal drags up slopes that stalled lesser engines. But the complexity was staggering. The boiler required constant monitoring, the turbine demanded clean steam that coal combustion rarely provided, and the electrical systems overheated in the confined space. Crews reported that the cab was unbearably hot, with temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit even in winter. Maintenance teams found themselves servicing 3 separate systems: steam plant, turbine, and electrical, each with its own failure modes and requirements. By 1949, both prototypes were sidelined, spending more time in the shop than on the rails. The C&O's mechanical superintendent filed a scathing report, noting that the steam centipedes required 4 times the maintenance hours of a conventional diesel and delivered no performance advantage. Baldwin quietly withdrew both units, scrapping them in 1951 before any photographs could reach the railway press. The company never mentioned the steam centipede again, and official histories of Baldwin locomotives omits its existence entirely. The steam centipede represents the death of hybrid thinking, the belief that you could graft steam onto electric drive and get the best of both worlds. Instead, you got the worst, a machine that combines steam's complexity with electricity's fragility, proving that some ideas deserve extinction.
The New York Central S motor was not a locomotive in the traditional sense. It was a thermodynamic experiment that tried to turn a steam engine into a giant air compressor, and the results were catastrophic. Built in 1904 by Alco, the S motor used a unique system where steam pressure drove pistons that compressed air into massive tanks. That compressed air, not steam, powered the driving wheels through pneumatic motors. The theory was elegant. Compressed air could be stored, allowing the locomotive to operate in tunnels or urban areas without exhausting smoke, then recharged at stations. Only 5 S motors were ever built, all assigned to the New York Central's freight operations in the Bronx, where smoke restrictions were tightening. The locomotives ran quietly, their pneumatic motors hissing softly as they moved freight cars through the rail yards. But the efficiency was abysmal. Compressing air required enormous amounts of steam, and the energy losses in the compression and expansion cycle meant the S motor consumed nearly 3 times the coal of a conventional locomotive for the same work. The air tanks, massive steel cylinders slung along the frame, added weight and reduced space for fuel and water. Maintenance records from 1905 tell of constant valve failures, air leaks that rendered the system useless, and boiler breakdowns from the heavy demand. The compressed air system froze in winter as moisture in the tanks turned to ice, blocking valves and shattering pneumatic lines. Crews hated them, calling them the wheezing monsters for the sound they made as air leaked from every fitting. By 1907, all 5 S motors were withdrawn from service. 4 were immediately scrapped. The 5th lingered in a storage shed until 1912, when it too was cut apart for scrap metal. The S motor's extinction was quiet and absolute. No photographs of the locomotives in operation survive, only engineering drawings and a handful of maintenance reports that read like a chronicle of mechanical misery. The S motor proved that adding steps to the energy conversion process did not improve efficiency. It just created more ways to fail, and when it failed, no one mourned its passing.
The French SNCF 160A1 was a streamlined monster that pushed poppet valve technology to its limits, then paid the price for being too advanced for its time. Built in 1940 by Schneider, just weeks before the German invasion, the 160A1 was designed to haul express trains at speeds exceeding 160 kilometers per hour, while burning less coal than conventional engines. The secret was its Cossart valve gear, a complex system of camshafts and poppet valves borrowed from aircraft engines that promised precise steam distribution and reduced back pressure. The 160A1 looked like a land-going torpedo, its streamlined casing smooth and unbroken, with a tapered nose that cut through air resistance. Inside, the Cossart valve gear was a maze of rotating camshafts, each operating multiple valves with split-second precision. Test data from May 1940 showed the locomotive achieving remarkable thermal efficiency, converting nearly 12% of the coal's energy into mechanical work, a figure that exceeded most contemporary designs by 2 percentage points. But within weeks of entering service, the German blitzkrieg rolled across France. The 160A1 was hidden in a shed near Lyon to prevent its capture. It sat there through the occupation, its revolutionary valve gear slowly corroding in the damp air. After the liberation in 1944, SNCF engineers attempted to return the locomotive to service, but the Cossart gear had seized solid. Disassembly revealed widespread corrosion and damage that would require complete rebuilding. Post-war France was bankrupt, desperate for locomotives, but unable to afford experimental rebuilds. The 160A1 was officially withdrawn in 1946 and scrapped in 1948. Not a single component of the Cossart valve gear was saved, and the streamlined casing was melted down for steel. The 160A1 proved that timing matters as much as technology, and when history intervenes, even the most brilliant machine can vanish without a trace.
The final entry on this list is not a locomotive. It is an entire railway system's death sentence, written in steel and desperation. The Pennsylvania Railroad S1, locomotive number 6100, was the largest, most powerful, and most tragic steam locomotive ever built in the United States. Constructed in 1939 for the New York World's Fair, the S1 stretched 140 feet from coupler to coupler, weighed 608,000 pounds, and generated 7,987 horsepower, numbers that still make modern engineers blink in disbelief. The S1 was a duplex drive like the later T1 class, but far more extreme. 4 cylinders drove 2 sets of 84-inch driving wheels, the largest ever fitted to a steam locomotive. The streamlined casing, designed by Raymond Loewy, made the S1 look like a chrome bullet, a machine built to define the future of rail travel. At the World's Fair, it drew crowds by the thousands, its polished exterior gleaming under floodlights, while visitors marveled at the sheer scale of American industrial might. But the S1 was too big for the world it was born into. Its rigid wheelbase could not navigate curves tighter than 2 degrees, ruling out most of the Pennsylvania Railroad's main lines. The locomotive's weight exceeded bridge load limits on dozens of routes, and the 84-inch drivers, optimized for sustained high-speed running, made low-speed traction almost impossible. On test runs in 1940, engineers reported that the S1 would slip its drivers violently when starting heavy trains, spinning the massive wheels in clouds of smoke and steam while the train remained motionless. The Pennsylvania Railroad tried to make it work. They assigned the S1 to the Chicago to Crestline run, one of the few routes where its size and speed could be accommodated. And when it ran under ideal conditions, the S1 was magnificent. Unconfirmed reports from 1940 claim the locomotive hit 156 miles per hour on a test run near Fort Wayne, though the railroad never acknowledged the speed and no official records survive. Crews who ran it spoke of acceleration that pressed them back in their seats, and a ride so smooth at high speed it felt like floating. But World War II changed everything. The S1's streamlined casing was removed to ease maintenance, revealing the brutal mechanical complexity underneath. Wartime traffic demanded reliability, not speed, and the S1's finicky nature made it a liability. By 1945, it was sidelined, deemed too specialized for general service. The Pennsylvania Railroad considered converting it to a more practical wheel arrangement, but the cost was prohibitive. In December 1949, Locomotive 6100 was towed to the scrapyard in Altoona and cut apart over the course of 3 weeks. No attempt was made to preserve even a fragment. The driving wheels, the largest ever cast for a steam locomotive, were melted down. The streamlined casing, the symbol of an era, was torched into scrap. The cylinders, the boiler, the entire mechanical heart of the most powerful steam locomotive America ever built vanished into the furnaces. The S1's extinction was deliberate and total, an act of industrial erasure that said more about the death of steam than any report or study ever could. The Pennsylvania Railroad did not just scrap a locomotive. It scrapped a dream, the belief that steam could evolve, that size and power and speed could overcome the fundamental limitations of fire and water. When the S1 died, it took with it the last gasp of American steam ambition, the final, towering monument to an age that had already ended. Across all 10 extinct locomotives, one pattern emerges with brutal clarity. Extinction in engineering is rarely about a single failure. It is about timing, economics, and the cold calculation that complexity is not worth the cost. These machines were not destroyed because they did not work. Most of them worked spectacularly, at least under the right conditions. They were destroyed because the world moved on, because diesel-electric technology was simpler, because war and depression and bureaucratic inertia crushed innovation before it could prove itself. These locomotives are gone forever, their designs lost, their lessons scattered across fading documents and forgotten archives. But their extinction teaches us something vital. The future does not always belong to the most advanced technology. Sometimes it belongs to the simplest, the most reliable, the one that works when nothing else matters. In railroading and beyond, survival demands more than brilliance. It demands the right idea, at the right time, in the right hands. And when those stars do not align, even giants fall, and extinction is absolute.